Hello again, everyone. Deflect here, Firm but Fair Gaming. Want to bring you a video. I've been asked questions before, and I've never done a video on it. But I had friends who play different MMOs and different games, and they always ask if they were to switch over to WoW, what is the hardest class type to play? Is it going to be tank? Is it going to be healer? Which is the most difficult? Well, the first question is always, what do you plan to play? Like it in? Is it going to be PvE? Is it going to be PvP? Is it going to raid? Is it going to Mythic Plus? Are you doing open world content? And that really is going to define what the hardest is to play in general. I'm going to keep this video mainly towards Mythic Plus because that's what I do the most of. I don't raid that much anymore, and I don't PvP a ton. I do enjoy, getting into PvP a bit, but I don't do it a ton. So I'm going to base this on Mythic Plus, but I will touch on the other groups. So starting off with your basic, I'm on a druid just because they actually have all classes. So they are the only one in the game with all 4 specs: a range DPS, a melee DPS, a healer, and a tank. I'm not going to touch on where what position they are in this because some druid specs are outperforming others by miles. But for the purpose of this video, they have all 4 specs. I will start because I am on my guardian setup. Just hasn't even done the keybinds yet, as you can tell. It's just a mess here, and I am on the PTR because WoW has an extended timeout today, so thought I would get together and make this one. As a tank in raid, you probably have one of the easiest jobs, so there's your raid tidbit. As a tank in Mythic Plus, you have the hardest job. So tank in Mythic Plus, they expect you to know the route. They want you to keep it as close to percentage as you possibly can, and they also want you to make sure you're going the right way, killing all the enemies, interrupting, you're doing big enough pulls, you're making sure you're not dying in the meantime, and you're making sure you have aggro on everything. So it's a very, very tough job to be a tank in Mythic Plus. You have all this responsibility, and you're just trying to survive, trying to make your pulls big enough, trying to keep your DPS happy, trying to work around their cooldowns, trying to call out interrupts, and trying to make sure you do not get nuked by a one-shot, and trying to keep the frontals away from your group. So you need to have your awareness, your directional awareness. If they have a frontal, you want to keep it away from your group if this is your group. That way you're not hitting the group with the frontal and causing excessive damage. You want to know if you can avoid the frontal, like in halls. If you just step back about 3 or 4 steps, you can avoid. They'll do the frontal in front of you, then you can go back in and hit them. They'll want to know how much damage each one is taking. Do you have to pop cooldowns? Do you not have to pop cooldowns? Who's kicking what? Because the tank a lot of the time is calling out the kicks, and in pugs, the tank gets the brunt of everything. So tank for Mythic Plus, I would say, is the hardest role to fill. It is a very tough role, but it is a very fun role once you get onto it. I main Vengeance DH. I also play all the tanks, but I main Vengeance DH. I just like it the best out of all the tanks. But it is challenging at the beginning or seasons when they change all the dungeons and you have to learn new routes. You have to learn new packs. You're expected to know what every pack does, where the kicks are. So it's very challenging at the very beginning. But like I said, it is a very rewarding one to play. Once you get it down, tanks are very fun to play. Being unkillable by any means, but being able to take big hits and do big damage is always fun. And if you're a BDK, you get to out heal everybody by like 10-fold. So there's that joy too if you like playing Blood Death Knight. Moving on to the other spec, we will go with healer. Healer in raid. I play a lot of I heal or I'm a healer in raid. I think I said that correct. Anyway, when I raid, I usually play healer. It's fun because there's usually group-wide damage. You're always out there doing a lot of healing, except for the first 4 bosses of the raid. This year, if you have 4 healers, you can basically sit there and DPS. Throw out the occasional heal, which is always fun too. But healers in raid are not too bad. If you're talking high-end progression, everybody in high-end progression has to be good. So I would say DPS will have the hardest time in high end progression because they need every ounce of DPS out of the DPS team. But healers are up there as well because you definitely need a lot of healing throughput in raid. But like I said, when you're doing, you know, if you're doing heroics now and you're geared enough that it really doesn't, they're not that important. So it all depends on where you are in the raid. PvP right now, they are in solo queue getting trucked. Healers are having a rough time in solo queue unless you're really good at healing, but healing is a very important job in solo queue. So in PvP, it is a very good spec to be because you get the instant queues or almost instant queues, but they are a lot falls on the healer in that one. And in dungeons, it's kind of, I would say it's mid complexity. If you have a good group, there's not as much healing. If you're pugging, there's going to be a ton of healing because people tend to stand and stuff while you're pugging. So I would put healers below the tank in Mythic Plus, but up there because you are expected to do a damage rotation now too. Not so many people like if you're just healing and not throwing out damage. They don't expect you to be top damage by any means, but they want you to be hitting their damage buttons to at least be on the meters and sending some down to help down the bosses and everything. Now, healers, there are easier and harder ones, I think, depending on what you play. Resto Druid has a ton of the bars filled with all different abilities. I usually, on my Resto Druid layout, I have the top bar filled with damage, middle bar filled with healing, and the bottom bar filled with mainly utility. So that's the way I lay mine out. That way I know on the keybinds where they are and what it's going to do. Unfortunately, I don't have Voodoo on here. If you are a healer, I highly recommend Voodoo. I have a Voodoo video, intro to Voodoo. It's a very good add-on that will help out your healing. It makes mouse overs for you, so you don't have to worry about it, which makes life a lot easier. And then you can just go to healing and clicking on the nameplates and everything. But back to the rating, I would put healer. They are now given a kick, so you have the option to help out with kicks. Almost every healer has a kick, if not them all, or a fear or an interrupt of some sort. As a druid, there is a great druid play I love using now. It's where you put down your vortex and then typhoon them. So instead of knocking them back and being obnoxious and knocking them out of the way, it knocks them and pulls them right back into the vortex. So not only do you interrupt what they're doing, but they don't move either. So little tidbit for the druids out there. Very fun to do. But yeah, I would say healers have a second toughest job in Pogs, but in a good group, they can more worry about damage than healing. But they are expected to know a healing rotation as well as a damage rotation to help out. So they kind of have twofold on that. But getting into the DPS, I would say, and this is, I don't know if everyone's going to agree, let me know in the comments below if you do or don't, but melee DPS have it harder than range DPS. And I will explain why. Range DPS, yes, it's tough because you're all casters and usually you have buttons that are casting and whatnot. So you are having, if you have to move, it is hitting your DPS. Like if I have to move during a wrath, that sucks because I interrupted a wrath. So yes, it is unfortunate that you have to move during that, but you can kind of plan around. Melee DPS, more mechanics are based around melee, so there's always something hitting, a frontal hitting. If you're range, you're not going to get hit by a frontal because you're so far back. But if you're melee, you can get hit by that frontal. You can get clipped by it, the tank spins, you can get clipped by something else. Quaking's usually a melee heavy problem, and different problems that come from the affixes from Mythic Plus are usually based on the melee area. So I would say melee's a little tougher than range, but played correctly, melee can do a ton of damage right now, so it is very, very good, and they have the short interrupt, so they are a great group benefit. That being said, range still has the toughness to try and maximize their DPS. But while they're maximizing their DPS, they're worried about movement and everything on the ground, so that does come into play, and that does make it harder on them. I would say in high, and again, progression rating, DPS become one of your most important roles and toughest to play because you are trying to get every ounce of damage out of your character. and you're trying to do the mechanics. But in Mythic Plus, it falls on the latter side, and it is one of the easier classes to play because you can carry a bad DPS. You can't carry a bad healer or a bad tank. It just isn't going to work. If the tank keeps falling over and dying, you're going to wipe. If your healer's not keeping up and people are dying, you're going to wipe. If a DPS keeps standing and stuff and dies, you have 2 other DPS. It will take a little longer, but you can usually get it done. So that's the way I look at the rating. I think the DPS, it's a little easier to get in and play DPS than that, because if you aren't doing the most DPS, or you aren't, you know, if someone's doing 70k DPS, the other guy's doing 68k DPS, and you're doing 35k, are you going to 2-chest it? Probably not. But are you going to time it? There's a good chance still, as long as your tank and healer are keeping up. So you can get away with having a non-great DPS, which makes it a little easier, whereas you can't get away with having a, you know, not great healer or a not great tank. Really, most of the time. There are a couple exceptions, but the majority and the purpose of this video, most of the time it's easier to carry a bad DPS than a bad tank. For not the purpose of the video, I have done a Court of Stars with no healer before the first boss, and I think we still timed it, but we didn't do chest. I'd have to double check. So it is possible to do, just depends. Anyways, let me know what you think of my rankings. I do think tank is the hardest in Mythic Plus to play, just because of the knowledge that you're expected to have. You're expected to know what each pack does. You're expected to know the route. You're expected to know what the damage each pack is going to do. You're expected to know when to call out interrupts. It's a lot of expectations on the tank. Whereas healer, you're there, you're important, but you're reactive. You don't have a set rotation, but you have cooldowns, and you should plan your cooldowns accordingly if you know the dungeons, or if you can just make sure you have enough cooldowns for any situation. Doesn't always happen, but it's a little easier, a little bit, to be a healer, I find. And then DPS in Mythic Plus, I believe, have it the easiest, because, you know, if you're not doing the greatest, or you're having a bad day, or your damage is down, the other DPS hopefully are on point and are able to get you through it still. So that is the way I look at it. If you're looking to get into Mythic Plus and you don't want responsibility, or you don't want to have the pressures put on you, try playing DPS. Try playing ranged DPS, as you can kind of get away with a little less by moving around. But definitely check it out. But if you do want that responsibility, it's great fun being a tank. And remember, tank and healers always get the shortest queues and usually pick to groups, because there is always a shortage of it. There's only 2 spots, one for a tank, one for a healer, but there's 3 spots for DPS. So lots out there for DPS. Not too many usually applying for tank and heals. Anyways, like I said, leave a comment below. Let me know what you're thinking, what your thoughts were. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, deflect, firm but fair gaming. We'll see you in the next video.